Well, hello. I'd like to talk to you today about a book that I first picked up in college. Dan Simmons' Hyperion. I'll hold that a little closer because I want you to notice a couple of details on this cover. Look at the wheel in the sailing ship, the fact that it's sailing in grass, and the fact that the spiky thingy has two arms. I'll come back to the two arms. This is how the book was meant to be marketed. So it's a different version of it. But yes, I want to talk to you today about Hyperion. And I know Dune is what's in the news right now, but you know what? I'm reading Hyperion, so we're going to talk about Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos. This book won a lot of awards, just listing a few. We've got 1990 Hugo Award, Best Novel. 1990 Locus Award, Best Novel. 1991 British Science Fiction Authors, Best Novel. 1992 the Arthur C. Clarke Best Novel. And probably more, but that's enough, right? Okay, so I've got my notes written down here. I actually wrote about 10 pages of notes on legal paper, and I said, maybe not. So this is my edited down version. But this is one of those books that's so exciting, I could go on and on. In fact, I put a link down the video description to Quinn's ideas. He did a whole video series about this book, delving into various aspects, and he plans to do more. So, if you really want to delve into this universe, visit Quinn's channel. But it is an interesting book. I first read it in college, which would be the mid to late 90s. I started college fall of 1994, and I saw this sitting on the shelf at Broad Street Books and Cafe in Grove City, Pennsylvania. Because do I dare admit this? I went to college in Grove City, Pennsylvania. That cover totally caught my eye. And yeah, I read the back of it and I was just like, but it's not something I know, but I want to know, and I bought it. And I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but I totally did there. And I read it, and I didn't like it. And then I went back to Broad Street Books and Cafe and bought the sequel. And I read that, and didn't like it. And so why am I reading this book for the third time about, 26 years later? I'll have to come back to that later in this video. There is a lot to talk about here. So the book was actually conceived as, this book was actually conceived as the first half of a much larger book, which would be this book. And due to limitations of printing and publication and so on, they ended up splitting them into two different books. So it does read that way. You get to the end, you're like, wait, what? Huh? It's over? It ends at a natural lull in the story, but not really a place that really matches any of the traditional story structure ideas. It just kind of, huh? And there is a lot in this book. Dan Simmons doesn't ease you into this universe. He is, okay, picture this. You're thrown into 12th century Japan. And you know the language, but you don't know anything about the culture. You know what you know now. And you're like, what? What? I don't get it. And that's how it feels in this book at first. You have the words, but you don't know the terminology or the history. They talk about the Hegira. They talk about the big mistake. They talk about the technocore. They talk about the all thing. And they don't explain it. They just plow right through it. And you're just left with, what? But, picture yourself back in that 12th century Japan. The longer you live there, the more you're going to get. The more you're going to understand. And that's what this book is. By the end of this book, you're not going to be a native, but you're going to know what's going on. He actually structures the narrative in such a way that you're like, okay, I can get this. It makes sense. Now you have to read with attention, but soon you're going to know those words. Like in the very first opening, you hear the word fat line, and you're like, oh? Yeah, you'll know what a fat line is. A lot of these terms will make sense. Now, Dan Simmons is kind of an interesting dude. He does not write in just one genre. He's been on this channel twice already. I did Song of Kali, and I did, I forgot its name. The vampire novel thingy that he did. But anyway, he writes in a lot of different genres. He has a background in English literature. He was an elementary teacher, but worked with gifted students mostly. And all of his background shows he has literary references. He has, like Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote Canterbury Tales. That's the structure of Hyperion. It's a bunch of people, 7 of them, on a pilgrimage, and they each tell their story. There's also a lot of John Keats poetry in this book. Yeah, John Keats, who died in his 30s with unfinished poems, one of which was called Hyperion. Yeah, he's in this book, and so is his poetry. I'm not a literary guy. Poetry, I will admit, even reading this book, when I saw poetry, my eyes just kind of went slip, like I slipped on some mud and went right past it, because that's what my brain does with poetry. Because I'm a science guy and a math guy, and I don't like poetry. But still interesting. The framing story that connects this book is that we have a pilgrimage of 7 people on the way to the time tombs. Yeah, you'll know what time tombs are by the end of the novel, on the planet Hyperion. It's an outback world in the hegemony of man. Wait, outback world? Hegemony of man? What are you talking about? Well, hegemony of man, that's like the big overarching civilization. Outback world, that's a world not connected by Farcaster. See, there's another word. We got to read the book to learn all these words. But basically, you can't get to Hyperion instantly by Farcaster. You have to kind of take the long route via spaceship, which involves time dilation, which, hey, my physics brain is going, yes! Because time dilation is right in my wheelhouse. So they talk about time debt, but, it's because time passes faster in a spaceship than it does, regular space. Or slower, because they end up young. Now there's a war with the ousters brewing, and you're like, wait, ousters? What is this other word that I don't know? That's a civilization of humans who have embraced living in space. They have modified themselves. Oh, yeah, people are looking in my window there. They're out in the street, so they can't see much. But anyway, these are people who've embraced living in space. And whereas the hegemony of man is still locked to planets. Hyperion is a target. It's unclear why in this book, but you do get some explanation. And you get the idea that the ousters are pretty horrible to prisoners because they're described, quoting here, sort of, they're described as being treated like dissected frogs, flayed open, pinned to trays, organs bathed in nutrient fluids, and shunts into their brain. I'm going to close this curtain because people keep looking over here because I think they see the bright light. I have a little clipper here because I got to clip the curtains shut. Okay. Back to it. So that's Yipe. Once on Hyperion, we find out that most of the population is evacuated to the capital city of Keats, named after John Keats, the poet, because they want to be evacuated before the ousters get there. The pilgrimage is actually kind of interesting. It shows a mix of far future and old-fashioned because, sometimes all at once. I always liked Poul Anderson's books because, yes, he could do science fiction, but he could also bring in the old-fashioned stuff. And you're like, wow, that blends together beautifully. This does the same thing. We begin on a tree ship. Yes, a spaceship that is actually a tree. Captained by Templar Hetmastine, who turns out to be one of the 7 pilgrims. And later on, they land on Hyperion in the Consul's, that's all he's ever called is the Consul, he never gets a name, private spaceship. But then they travel upriver on a barge drawn by a pair of manatees. But apparently on other planets where there's more of an electromagnetic field, this is a barge that would float on the electromagnetic field. Here it's drawn by some mantas. Did I call them manatees earlier? Sorry. Then they travel across the Sea of Grass on a sailboat. Sorry. That sailboat right there, which has a wheel in it, because it has gyroscopes and sails, and it's designed to just sail through the Sea of Grass, which is a fancy name for a prairie. I live in the prairie, so... Sorry, dropped something. I live in the prairie, so, I'm kind of like, where's my little boat? Anyway, it's wood, it's primitive, it's sail-powered, and yet automatic and controlled by computers, so... And then finally, they do a multi-day basically a ski lift over a mountain range. During this trip, they agree to tell their stories as they travel, and each story kind of has its own genre. And this is where I'm diverging from my outline because I wrote notes on every single one of those stories, and I decided filming this that, no, if you're interested, you'll read the book. If you're not interested, you don't care. So, I'm not going to tell all those stories. But I will tell you that there is a body horror piece, a military action piece about a poet, a hard-boiled detective story, a tragedy, and I'm dead serious that it is a tragedy, and a love story that involves some little bit of revolution and stuff. Hetmastine never tells his story because on the wind wagon, he's kidnapped and leaves behind a whole lot of blood. What these stories do is they introduce us to a universe. And, although they're different genres and it's complicated, you're introduced to enough of the universe to realize that, holy cow, this is a lot bigger than I thought. And they introduce us to the characters. The characters change and grow within these stories. And honestly, these stories set the stage for the next 3 novels. And some of them don't get their payoff until the very last novel. So that is... wow. So we are introduced to a far future society. It takes place in the 29th century. Earth was destroyed by an accident with a black hole, and humanity... that's called the big mistake. And humanity fled Earth in what they call the Hyperion. So, okay, we get that. Now we have some terms. Those who chose to live between the stars became the ousters. The rest became the hegemony of man. During this time, the artificial intelligences broke off from humanity, formed an independent technocore, which advises the hegemony. Part of the hegemony government is what they call the All Thing. That's accessible to all members of the hegemony due to neural implants and access to fat line transmission, which is a nice way of saying instantaneous, no matter how far apart they are. It is called the web era, and I just find it interesting that all this in a book published in 1989. The planet Hyperion has a bunch of stuff. The body horror that takes place there sets the stage for the final 2 novels, and I'm not kidding. It's totally necessary. The time tombs on Hyperion are a set of structures which we don't get an explanation yet, but they are traveling back in time from the far future. And most famous of all, of course, is the Shrike, who they present on this cover with not enough arms, because the Shrike has 4 arms. So the artist goofed there, but he's described as a 3-meter tall creature made of metal with 4 arms, 2 red eyes, and everything about it is spikes. It's named for the Shrike, which is a bird which likes to impale its prey on thorns. And this Shrike in this book has a great big thorn tree upon which are impaled many humans and some others. One of the pilgrims has actually seen the tree, and when the other pilgrims ask if any of them were on the tree, he says yes, but then he won't tell them which ones. But don't worry, we've got the fall of Hyperion coming where we find out. There is a lot of religion in this book. We have the Church of the Shrike. Yeah, apparently this spiky dude inspired a church. We've got the Jewish faith making an appearance. In fact, with a lot of references to the story of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. He's like, okay, I'll just kill my son. I don't care. And we've got the Roman Catholic Church. And then we have the Templars, who have their own faith, and one of the characters is Muslim. So yeah, we've got a lot of religion here. Now, the religious faith of all these characters is important because it kind of determines their action. And one of the themes is how are we outgrowing religion? How does religion have to change to match how we are now? This book has an engaging, very deep universe. Even after the 4th book, because I'm going to do all 4 books here, right in a row, you know that there is so much more to explore in this universe and lots of mysteries left to solve. I love that in a book because I feel like I always love when I leave a universe and I'm like, no, I want more, rather than, well, that's done. Now, I will concede that it leans kind of on the soft side of science fiction. But it's also so far future that Arthur C. Clarke's little thing about, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I don't know why I gave Arthur C. Clarke a southern accent, but there you go. This book knows that not all planets are like Earth. There's higher, lower gravities, there's interesting atmospheres. And this book also addresses cultural assimilation and worse. The characters in this book are mostly believable, and I appreciate that they grow and change. Again, as they tell their stories, because it's a Canterbury Tales type of deal. And I guess it's worth pointing out that this is not a random collection of stories. These stories tie together and they create a universe, and they set up the next 3 novels. This is good stuff. Now, I opened up by saying I didn't like it when I read this in college, and that is true. The book ends abruptly. I think any reviewer that's honest is going to tell you that. I didn't realize until I returned to the Broad Street Books and Cafe in Grove City, Pennsylvania, which no longer exists, the bookstore, not the town, that there was a second book. So I was just like, what? And back then, of course, no internet was available to me. The internet existed, but didn't have nearly on it what it does now. And where I was, Grove City College, I just had no access to it except for email. But even so, as a younger person, I wasn't who I am now. I was very literally minded back then. I was very uncomfortable with anything that came in shades of gray. I didn't like ambiguity, and I didn't like unanswered questions. All those are kind of present in this book. I will also say that the presentation of religion in this book was threatening to me. Because, Grove City College, if you don't know, is a extremely right-wing religious college. So yeah, I was a bit threatened. Now, Dan Simmons is not hostile to religion, but I think he's realistic about it. And he's not afraid of difficult questions or the idea that people will wrestle with it or just reject it or recreate it to meet their own needs. And he is very well aware of how humans manipulate religion. I wasn't ready for that back then. And there is some more not to like. I will concede that the book wanders a bit. The structure, I'll say, I wouldn't have chosen it, but it's a stylistic choice. And this way you've got a book with, Hetmestein disappears. I should say disappears before he tells his story. So really you've got 6 main characters. And, the console kind of bookends the novel, but nobody really takes over to be like, I am the main character. And so much of it seems pointless when you read it the first time. What is the point of the Shrike's Tree of Pain? You end Hyperion and you still don't know. How does he keep people alive on it? Again, you end Hyperion and you still don't know. Where does he hide it? Because it mostly disappears and reappears. Well, some of that gets answered in the next novel, but this isn't that review. Speaking from 26 years later, I can see some strong female characters in this book, but I also see some female objectification as well. One of the tales involves a woman who waits her entire life for a total of 6 visits from a man who doesn't age or mature relative to her due to time dilation effects as he travels back and forth from her planet to wherever it is he comes from. He's like 21 by the time she's an old lady and dies. Now, to be fair, she is a strong woman and has major influence over the plot, but still, 6 times in a lifetime you get to see this dude. And he's basically a kid every time. Alright, apologies if everything changed. Suddenly my battery died, so yeah. So where was I? I was talking about the... oh yeah, only one of the pilgrims is female, unless you count the infant. But female is actually the hard-boiled detective when I talked about the different genres. But of course, she's also happy to hop in bed with her client. And okay, a little bit of genre awareness there. Yeah, I know that these hard-boiled detectives will hop in bed with their clients too. You know, oh, I got my femme fatale here. I better just go badonk-a-donk and yeah, keep my hard-boiled street cred. And, I got my secret tragedy and everything. You know, it's all tough. We also get to meet Moneta in the military fiction story. She likes to have sex after battle, especially if her body and her boyfriend's body are just covered with blood of their enemies. They do that a lot. Yeah, blood sex. Weirdly enough, in one scene... okay, I am not trying to make you say, oh my god, I am never reading this book, but, you know, little weirdness here. During one scene, he is, you know, her and her dude are, you know, doing the frisky thing, and she turns into the Shrike during the frisky thing, and, but it's the Shrike with an extra chompy, very spiky vagina. The only woman really in this book that's not sexual is Mina Gledstone. She's the CEO of the Hegemony of Man. Now, I don't think Simmons is trying to be sexist at all, but I think it does lean toward that trap that science fiction is kind of a boys-only club. Read some older science fiction and you'll know what I mean. Like, where are the girls? Just all boys here? This isn't quite that bad, but, you know, it kind of leans that way. And, you know, a man writing is going to be interested in the women. I guess unless he's interested in the men, but Dan Simmons is not. But on the whole, it is a good book. Very well worth reading. And there are channels, like I said at the beginning, like Quinn's Ideas, that explore the Hyperion universe in much greater depth. I linked a master's thesis that was about Dan Simmons' novel. I love a universe that has a lot of depth. It's a universe that when you're done, there's so much more to explore, and you feel that this whole book took place in something big, and you just got to see a small piece of it. And when I see something like that in fiction, I know I've found something powerful, because the world I live in is just like that. So, next week we'll talk about the fall of Hyperion, and then we will, after that, delve into the other 2 sequels, the Endymion and Rise of Endymion. So, hope you'll follow me through this. And now that I see that Dune is kind of on the upswing, I'm thinking, like, I jumped on the wrong horse, but we're going to go with Hyperion. So, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.